That was the most amazing intro anybody has ever given, Anne or I imagine. And so thank you very much, Joseph Hughes, and thank you guys at Weapons of Mass Creation for allowing us to kind of close it out. And we're really excited to be here. It's been a wonderful experience. And if you haven't seen us around, like, please come say hi. I'd love to meet everybody from the internet. Also, small thing, I'm like 8 followers away from 2,000 followers on Twitter. And like, this is the only time I'm ever gonna have the chance to be like, if like 8 of you like have a chance to find your way to Twitter tonight.
So it seems really appropriate to now show you photos of us, because that was like a great transition. This is us, and Dylan is a pictures person.
Anne is a words person.
And you know, we worked together at a magazine called Good for a little more than a year. And this photo is a rare photo of us in the wild creating the magazine before it got super gnarly and we were locked in a room for hours before deadline. But this is sort of the beginning of the process. We did 4 magazines a year, so it was a quarterly, and a daily web magazine as well. And we're mostly going to talk about the print magazine because it provides a really nice way to talk about the tension between allocating resources and attention and time to words versus visuals. So this photo here, we are making the page map for the magazine, which is where it starts to get really real. We got to decide how much space is involved for each of these things, and consequently how much money. And it's really sort of the starting place for the negotiation that Dylan and I had every time we made a magazine together. So we did, like I said, we did 4 of these over the span of a year, and then we all got fired. So, and then we worked together on this one-off magazine that we raised money for on Kickstarter, which Joseph lovingly summarized. Anyway, so this is what it looks like, and this is what we're going to talk about and share what we learned.
Yeah, so real quick, a quick disclaimer. Anne and I are directly involved in the media world, and what we're going to try and do is talk about those specific things, but the goal is, if you're collaborating with someone that's outside of your industry, hopefully these things that we've learned are able to be ported over and kind of used in your world. I think it just had a puberty squeak, and that was pretty good. So yeah, just right off the bat, we're going to be talking about some like pretty specific things regarding media, but that is not to say that that is like the one thing that you need to be taking away from this. Like, the idea is that any of these things, if you're a visual person, which I think a lot of us in here are, and you're working with someone that's outside of that purview, how to kind of build that relationship, really build a lot of trust.
Actually, wait, how many here would identify as sort of primarily like non-visual creators? Shout out to my 5 people. Awesome. Anyway.
So yeah, right off the bat, it's not tennis, it's tango.
Really? Is that what it says?
That's what it says right up there. And essentially what we're meaning by that is tennis is like kind of a great metaphor for how the process used to work. You would kind of hold on to your thing, you'd do your work on it, you'd bounce it over to the other person.
Here. You bounce it to the other person.
I lobbed that over there.
Right.
And they would take it and sort of work with it and lob it back. And that's a really great process for a previous time, but now things need to be a little bit more fluid. You need to dance with your partner.
Neither of us can actually dance.
Please don't ask us to. I know Adam got that question a lot, and he's like pretty good at it, and all I can do is like a shameful worm. So maybe if I'm drunk enough tonight, you'll see that.
Oops.
Oh, well, so in this, we're going to like kind of talk about an initial failure where we were employing the tennis method. And that is this. This is the iconographic, which was kind of an ambitious project. We were looking to take about 10 to 12 pages in the magazine and figure out a way to kind of crystallize the entire rise and fall of the American economy.
It wasn't ambitious at all.
Not in the slightest. And I was really happy to get the assignment.
I mean, but part of the idea behind this is that, you know, we always see these sort of disparate charts and graphs that are like, you know, here's something about unemployment, or here's something about, you know, this other part of sort of the economy, and we were like, well, how does all of this add up, and like, is there some way that we can give it a narrative arc and really devote some space to explaining, you know, the past 10 years or so?
And at the initial phase, I was working with our business editor at the time, Tim Fernholz, and we were kind of creating specifically charts. We were looking at this as like a purely visual exercise. So we were holding on to that idea, and then eventually, about 2 days before close of the issue, Anne finally like dug into it. I mean, it's 12 pages. She's basically guiding the rest of the book at this point. And so this is her first chance to really sink into it.
I hated it. It looked really bad. We don't actually have any images from that time because we destroyed them to preserve our friendship.
That's really true. So what happened here was when she got to it, she kind of was like, we need to throw all of this out and start over, which basically meant taking away 2 days of work for me around that.
Yeah.
And so I had to take a long walk of tears. And I came back to it, and we got into a room with Tim, and this is when we kind of first took a really good run at like this massive collaboration idea. So we started to whiteboard the overall process, and the takeaway was that Tim was going to kind of flesh out the words and really create like a structure for it, and Anne was cued into the idea of like, how do we move someone through this? Like literally, how do we thread the thing together? And so you'll see there's like a arrow graphic device that sort of moves you through the entire thing, and that became the thread. Like that was your navigation point. And so previous to this discussion, we had nothing on that level, and suddenly we had like a pretty flowing narrative that came together relatively quickly. It was a painful process, but we got there.
And the other reason we wanted to show this is because, on balance, there's sort of like this doesn't work without the words, and it doesn't work without the visuals. I mean, I think that we have this notion of like you can make an infographic maybe in media, or you can have a prose piece that's illustrated or supported by something visual. And this is something that just absolutely relies on both of our ways of telling stories. So I think that both of us think it could have come out a lot better if we hadn't exploded it all 2 days before deadline. But ultimately, we're pretty proud of the result here. So. And I think that, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today as well is it's not just about the products that we created together at Good so much as the sort of personal effect that working with someone with a different discipline has had on both of us.
It got so real, guys.
It got so real. So real. There's a lot of lip service paid to the idea of sort of like really finding what you do really well and like what your specific voice is and sort of being true to that and being true to a vision, and that is all totally valid and totally true. But there's also this idea that both of us have come to really espouse, that it's great to sort of stretch your creative muscles, as our spirit animal David Byrne says, to accommodate someone else's muse, which is it is a really, really difficult thing to do. Like, I don't want your muse. Like, I have my own thing going on. Like, I don't understand, like, a lot of, like, Dylan's points of reference that, like, inspire the work that he does.
And I also didn't, I mean, I had never read John Jeremiah Sullivan, who's an amazing journalist, prior to meeting Anne. That's not to say that that's her muse, it's just, the muse is like kind of this overarching process that previous to working with Anne, at the previous editorial staff, they were really great, but we had sort of like kind of fallen into a really good rhythm with how we put this stuff out. This was the first time that I personally had this disrupted with someone that had such a keen process for creating really, really great journalism. That's not to take anything away from any prior iterations of the magazine or anything else.
Well, and I had only worked at magazines that were primarily words-driven, right? So both of us had experience only following sort of the muse of our discipline. And I think that the lesson that we came to is that sometimes, like, you shouldn't do what your self-perceived ideal is. Like, you should really sort of get out of that space. And that the constraints created by working with another person can produce better work with broader appeal. I know both of us want to make work that appeals to, I want to make work that appeals to people who aren't writers and aren't editors, and Dylan wants to make work that appeals to non-designers, and how better to do that than to collaborate in real time with someone who you hope to be part of your potential audience. So here's a great example of one attempt. When we started talking about benefits of collaboration, one of them is having another person to sort of pull you out of your own ass. And this is
your ass is such a lonely place, guys. Don't get caught up in that ass.
So this is the graphic statement from the second issue that Dylan and I made together. And so we were still kind of finding our sort of collaborative language. The graphic statement is supposed to set the visual tone for the entire issue, and you can talk more about that.
Yeah, so with this specific example, the guest designer and I, Greg Hubacek, who I've worked with a couple times on a lot of different projects, we were trying to figure out like what's the best graphic distillation of this idea of the
Wait, what was the idea? What was the issue about?
So the issue was called The Next Big Thing. And what we were kind of looking at is like, what are the true trend lines pointing to? Like, say if someone's like maybe writing about something right now, like, can we get out ahead and write about something that they're going to be writing about in 6 months? And Greg and I took that same idea, but with design, we were trying to think of, okay, like, if we can figure out like some sort of rich typographic language that hopefully like everybody rips off in a year, which I don't know if we ever got to, but like that was the idea. Like we were aiming for this idea, like really hit this trend line, really hit this like out of the park to be the next big thing. And what we came to was, if we can kind of modify, this is Raisonné, which is like a really great typeface, and it's a Walter Allen White quote. And so we kind of started to like fuck with everything, and we were trying to figure out exactly how this like would work as a graphic statement. And we landed on this.
Pause for 1 second. So when I saw it, it was like we tried to fuck with it and make it awesome, is what they told me when I was like, it's just a bunch of type, like it's supposed to be the graphic statement. There's a gutter in the middle of this, so how are people going to read it across the spread? And then Dylan had to explain the actual reasoning.
So what we were employing here was like, this is the graphic statement. From here on out, this typographic usage is going to be on every headline, and this sentiment is actually like a pretty great distillation of the overall idea. And these the letter forms are alien enough to feel a little next big thing. And I think that maybe we caught Anne at a weak point at like 2 in the morning on issue close, but she agreed to it. And I would say that this is actually probably one of our better graphic statements in terms of like hitting a really nice point, having its own voice, and then also being pretty solid on like as something to look at. And we got you to get on board.
Yeah, and we mention it here too because, you know, Dylan and Greg were working in collaboration, and we're like, yeah, dude, it's awesome, it's awesome, it's awesome. And then finally showed it to me, and I was like, what? And so, you know, and I did. And once I saw it in print, I was like, I get it, I understand, and I loved it.
And that took a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And so
we don't actually fall on each other either, much like the dancing metaphor.
And so with trust falls, what that kind of encapsulates is you have to really like be emboldened enough to take in what the other person is asking you to do, but then also stand up for the things that you're into. And so Anne asked our friend and editor on this same issue what he remembered.
So we had a guest issue on the next big thing.
A guest editor?
Sorry, a guest issue. Oh my God, a guest editor on that issue. And when we set out to kind of put together this presentation, I very broadly asked him, what did you observe about Dylan and my working relationship? And this is the G-chat that ensued.
I'm almost positive I'm going to have to make that infographic. Like, a hundo percento, I'm going to have to make that infographic. So yeah, this was really great. This was awesome to see someone else who had kind of been along for this early ascent into trust between Anne and I sort of distill it in such a nice way. And this is like coming to that point of like when we felt emboldened to kind of push back against the other person, to maintain the voice that like we had kind of felt strongly about going in. And so this is our piece about James Dean. If you're unfamiliar, James Dean is a wildly popular porn star who was also recently in the film The Canyons, opposite our good friend Lindsay Lohan.
I would like to note we published this profile before GQ and before he was in The Canyons. We were first, next big thing.
Suck it, GQ. So what we had here was something where the words were so good, and we had also sent a photographer to go shoot James Dean in his like just recently moved into mansion. So we had these amazing shots of this porn star solemnly looking at his telephone in a big empty house with like gore porn everywhere. And it was super weird to look at, and I thought that these images conveyed the character. Like to me, when I saw it, I was like, this is the guy. Like this is actually the conceit of the story. And Anne
And I was
consistently.
like, this is super interesting. It is about him, but it's a larger story about women and sexuality in the porn industry. And like, you know, it's not just, we can't just have 6 pages of large photos of James Dean because it's not all about him.
And so I kept trying to figure out ways where we could just get a lot of these photos in. And we were kind of playing
They
with
all
like,
involved cutting words.
yes, most of it was like we need to cut about a full, like maybe half a page of text, which is a pretty deep cut for something like this. And in one of my weak points at like 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure this out on my own, I started just reading the piece on page. And I read iterations and drafts as they're coming in, but oftentimes I'm not reading the final Titan version until I'm literally like flowing it and figuring it out. And so as I'm kind of trying to solve this problem, I just fell into the story. And it was fucking great. Like, the whole way through, it read perfectly, and I realized I don't need to add any more shit to this. Like, it was the wrong idea, and Anne was totally right in terms of this is a larger thing. Like, we're talking about women really crowdsourcing their sexuality here, and like, I started to draw back on it, and I started to really trust Anne when she came to me and said, no fucking way, we cannot cut these words. And it was a big step.
And we also have a reverse example where you know, one of the ways that these conversations get really real is when we talk about money. And this is an article about the South American psychedelic drug ayahuasca. It was kind of like a drugs, rock, sex issue now that we talk about it, and pretty awesome. And you know, Dylan was like, we got to get this illustrator, Micah Lidberg. He'd be perfect. We're going to give a full page. We're going to pay him a little above the normal illustrator rate we do because he commands a higher rate or whatever. And I was kind of like, are you kidding? Like can't we just get, like, I mean, it seems like an assignment that 1 million people could do something cool and kind of psychedelic with. And but I was like, all right, whatever. And then when I saw the initial sketches, and definitely when I saw the final version, I was like, yes, totally worth it. And so both of these examples are to say that from that point forward, I think that both of us took a lot more seriously when the other was like, no, I'm actually not budging on this.
Also, look at how tight that drawing is. That painting is amazing. Like, why? Oh my God, I'm so stoked. Like, if that could be an all-over print, I would wear that every day.
Oh man.
Like a jumpsuit.
I would also wear that. We could have matching jumpsuits made.
Shit, we really blew it. We should have. Oh man. Okay.
Okay. So the other thing that came of this is that, you know, you sort of start to develop skills that the other person has. Like when you start to have a real respect for, you know, communicating visually or communicating in words, it's like maybe you kind of want to try it out a little bit. And one of the unforeseen effects of our collaboration is that we've both kind of grown skill sets in the other's direction. One example I love is that I always say that in media, designers are some of the best headline writers who never get any credit. They're always writing sort of placeholder headlines as they're designing early versions. And so much of that either ends up informing the final headline or actually ends up running. And this is an example of, we ran a profile of this astrologist named Susan Miller, who is sort of very popular on Twitter. And
Is anybody familiar with Susan Miller? Okay.
Yeah. Who has a very loyal, like a very loyal following, and
She communicates with Barack Obama, guys.
I mean, she had a White House audience. It's pretty big. Anyway, so when we were trying to come up with headlines for this thing, our guest editor was like, Miller Time, Miller, some play on like Susan Miller, and you know, Dylan, who was in the room, probably like half headphone, designing something else, was like Miller's Light, and like. And that was the headline that ended up running. I know, right? So good. So yeah, so that's like one, you know, I do feel like Dylan's headline writing skills steadily improved over the time we worked together.
All pun-based.
All pun-based.
Always pun-based. And so, in that same vein, so sadly we don't have the spread from where this appeared, but whew. So what you're seeing here are 2 illustrations by Liz Momont, who was one of our interns at the time. And this is for a piece about time capsules that appeared in the same issue. And what we were going to do is kind of the same convention that you saw previously with ayahuasca and with James Dean. Full page, opposite headline, kick into text. Super simple. And as we were printing everything out and hanging it up on the wall, Anne was struck by how there's this spot in the back that was kind of a little bit more ambiguous. It was definitely like much more of an abstract thing. And she just turned to me and she said, well, why don't we put that on the front and then put the other thing in the back?
That's how I talk about design. Kind of, you can move that thing and put the other thing.
And I said, we can definitely do the move thing when put the other thing with the thing. And I'll be damned, guys, she nailed it. And like, it was actually like something where I was super stoked because we had this idea of like, this is a much more ambiguous object, and then the reveal to show that it was a removed puzzle piece was kind of a better play all the way around and fit the story a little bit more. And I was really, I think this is when we were starting to vibe on this idea. And also, I would say, this is kind of a critical point too. We also started to become, oops.
What do you want?
The buddies. Oh, wait.
No. Wait.
Damn it. Okay.
No.
Guys, it's okay.
Let the editor control the scroll.
I've been doing this all day, just hitting that button a little too early.
We have a post-good anecdote where that applies as well, which is that, you know, like Dylan is actually like a great writer, not just of headlines and puns, but has been writing about stuff in the design world since we started working together. This is a piece that he did for Tomorrow Magazine, our post-good effort that was reprinted in the Harvard Business Review. And I make these little pie charts for a website called The Hairpin. And which is not to say that I couldn't have done, or either of us couldn't have done these things before, but I don't think I necessarily would have thought about communicating in like you know, a more visual medium prior to our collaboration.
And what's kind of great about this is that like so what you're seeing there with her pie chart is something that would oftentimes be handed to me as like a rough sketch for something. So it'd be like a rough flow chart or a rough idea for like a subjective infographic that sort of played to these conventions. And I just kept constantly being like, these are the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. Like, I just love these. And without Anne, I honestly would not have felt bold enough to try and talk about the topics in design that I have kind of become a little bit known for. And so that's another thing where it's bled over past just the strict working relationship we had.
Now we're going to talk about being buddies.
Buds. Hey, buddy. So yeah, this kind of really distills our entire relationship. We are best fucking friends. And this is maybe a unique situation. You're definitely not going to meet every time that you're like across from the collaborator and you're just really into it. But it certainly helps. Like, guys, let me say, become friends with the people you work with because it's totally worth it. It's so hard to get through something where you're constantly battling the other person because you want to battle. It's really great to try and figure out, like, how can we get to this destination smoothly as possible, but understanding that bumps arise and, like, you can take those lumps and bumps.
But some of it is just luck, be real.
Oh, straight up.
Right.
Big ups to luck. And so in that, I found myself getting a job at The Verge recently for Vox Media, which is a digital native publication. Thank you. And I don't know if I would have gotten that job strictly based on the acumen that I had in design. I think that Anne's professional network that I had sort of become infused into is a big reason why my name was sort of floated towards that job, and I'm super grateful for it.
Right, and Dylan is the reason I know the design world and am at awesome places like Weapons of Mass Creation. So my name is only up there because I work for myself, and Dylan made my awesome logo, and we had to put something on the other side of the screen.
Guys, Anne is way more successul than
Stop
me.
it.
Don't
We're
like
not playing
all
that game.
shit.
We're not playing
Like,
that game.
No, we're playing it, guys. We're doing it.
So in conclusion, this is a photo of, so this is the night that Dylan and I found out we were going to be fired. This was taken mere moments after we learned that we were going to be fired.
You may notice that we've got a very peaceful, serene look to our faces. We may be a little glassy-eyed.
The point is, our collaboration continues. Not just for things like this talk, but I feel like I am always sending Dylan things, and I'm just like, what do you think about this? Can you believe this thing this other publication did to my work? You never would have done this, etc.
It's true. And I send her a lot of stuff. I also, as I've been growing into this new role with Verge, we're exploring feature-rich things at Vox all the way across the board, and I think that we're really great at it. And every time I send something to Anne, I think that it's an approval on the overall concept because it's very analog to what we were doing previously, and it's great to hear that like it's going over well with journalists and especially someone that I consider so great.
Aw, love fest. So if during sort of the Q&A portion anybody has like troubleshooting or like advice to like advice-seeking questions about how to deal with their non-visual collaborator, I feel we could do kind of like a Lucy, like, the doctor is in for you. Or we can answer other questions or whatever. Thank you.
But thank you guys so much.